5 Live Formula One.
Hello and welcome to the first practice session of the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend. It is the 11th race of the championship, and we come into this weekend with Max Verstappen still leading the championship. 99 points separating him and his teammate Sergio Perez now, and Red Bull also dominating when it comes to the Constructors' Championship as well. So the Hungarian Grand Prix, it is upon us. This is a weekend I think that the drivers love. They love this racetrack. It's a little bit of a karting track. Alongside me this weekend is the former Williams F1 driver Jack Aitken, our lead commentator Chris Hartley, and BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. And Jack, this is a track that the drivers know quite well, enjoy racing at. What is it about the Hungaroring that gets the drivers going?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. It's the elevation change. It goes up and down, twists all around. It has been called the Monaco without walls in the past. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but it is very tight and twisty. So it's a very challenging circuit for the drivers. You're constantly working in the cockpit of the car, left, right, lots of changes of direction and little chicanes to work through. So it's a lot of fun to drive. Racing can be very difficult here. To follow another car closely is tricky.
Well, we're looking forward to a great weekend. Andrew Benson, I know you've been busy over the last week since that news broke that Daniel Ricciardo is back on the F1 grid. Nick de Vries is out, no longer an F1 driver. Daniel Ricciardo seemingly in really good spirits, sort of using this positive energy that perhaps he's been storing up in the last sort of 6 or 7 months to tackle this new venture into F1.
Well, he'd become a kind of shadow of himself, hadn't he, in the sort of latter stages of his McLaren career last year, when Eddie Irvine used to describe being Michael Schumacher's teammate as like being hit round the head by a cricket bat every weekend, and it was a bit like that with Ricciardo and Lando Norris last year. Perhaps not to the same Michael Schumacher kind of level, but still, that's what Ricciardo was going through. And he obviously begun to doubt himself, but he says he's fallen in love with Formula One again. He was obviously really quick in the Red Bull car at Silverstone last week, otherwise he wouldn't have got this chance. And he's, as you say, Rosanna, full of positive energy, and I think everyone's really interested to see how he gets on.
I think interested and also perhaps slightly fearful that there's rather a lot of pressure on him to perform. Chris, this is a track that Daniel Ricciardo knows well, he's won at, so at least it's a track that he can settle into from using his experience. But this car's difficult. The AlphaTauri is a difficult beast. How should he be approaching this weekend?
Well, what he said is that he's got no real expectations until he's driven the car. So he'll want to perform well against his teammate, of course, but until he drives the car, until he knows exactly what it's like, he doesn't know if the target should be a 14th place or an 8th place or somewhere in between, which is the right thing to do. What he does know is that it's not going to be as good as the car he drove a couple of weeks ago at Silverstone, when he apparently was very impressive in the tyre test, as Christian Horner said. So I think he's going into it with a realistic expectation, but also quite openly, it seems, with the goal of, one day, soon maybe, getting back into Red Bull as a full-time racing driver.
Well, that engine noise you just heard was the AlphaTauri of Daniel Ricciardo. He's just lining up in the pit lane, getting ready to take on this FP1 session. Red Bull, so dominant at the moment, Max Verstappen especially so. Andrew, they have got upgrades this weekend. I know you're a bit sceptical. It's not perhaps just this weekend that they've brought an upgrade to this year so far, but what are we expecting? I mean, how much further ahead can Max Verstappen ultimately get?
Well, he's already a long way ahead, Rosanna, isn't he? The upgrades look pretty significant. They've got a sort of redesigned side pod. The air inlet for the radiator section is much narrower, and that means that the undercut on the side pod can be much more extreme, which will mean more air mass going down the side of the car, which will mean more downforce, which will mean more speed, especially around this place, which is just corner after corner after corner. As Jack said, the middle sector here is one of my favourite parts of the season. It's just fantastic. The corners getting faster and faster. There's almost like one bleeding straight into another. It's exactly the sort of track on which Red Bull will excel. And just on the upgrades, Christian Horner's been saying, we've not been upgrading the car very much this year. If you look at the car presentation submissions, as they're called by the FIA, there's a Red Bull upgrade pretty much every weekend. Not always as big as some of the other teams, but definitely keeping coming. It's raised some eyebrows up and down the rest of the pit lane, given the budget cap saga from last year. But anyway, here we are. He's gonna walk this weekend, I think. I can't see anything else happening.
Well, we are very close to the start of FP1 starting. We've spoken about the Red Bulls bringing some upgrades this weekend. I'm just seeing in the pit lane, actually, quite a few cars running some aero rakes around the car. A little bit of furniture here or there. Jack, good chance to test out some new bits of kit for the teams as well in this session.
Yeah, of course, as you say, it's not just Red Bull that have brought upgrade packages. And with rain looking quite likely in this first session, they're all queuing to get out of the pit lane and really desperate to get some validation on those upgrade packages and those rakes that we see on the back of the car, collecting all that data for the airflow and just, making sure that it lines up with the modelling that they've done back at the base. It's a little bit boring for the drivers because you can't run any of the curbs, you can't really attack the circuit in the same way, but it's very crucial for the teams.
Well, as you say, the cars are piling out onto the track now, which I think is going to be to the delight of the crowds that are filling the grandstands around the Hungaroring. I'm going to hand it over to you guys in the commentary box. So, Chris, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed. So we've got the cars heading out for the first of our practice sessions on, at the moment, a dry track. But overhead at the Hungaroring, there are quite a few dark clouds, and the forecast for the whole day really is that there is somewhere between a 50 and 65% chance of rain, maybe even some thunderstorms. So drivers keen to get out there and gather that data in this first exploratory trip onto the track. We're looking at pictures of the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, fresh off the back of his podium finish on home ground at Silverstone a couple of weeks ago, where he benefited to some extent from a safety car during the pit stop period and leapfrogged a couple of drivers, including his teammate George Russell. Had a great battle then with Lando Norris in the middle part of the race, going wheel to wheel for a lap or so, or just under a lap, and a buoying result and podium for him. A very different track this, but one which Lewis Hamilton absolutely loves, because he has got the record here for the most number of race wins, Grand Prix wins at the Hungaroring with 8. And he's also got the most pole positions here than anybody in history. In fact, he's got more than double the amount of wins here than the next best, which is Michael Schumacher. So it's a very different circuit, this, to Silverstone. It's not quite the polar opposite, Jack, but it's very different. You don't have high-speed turns here. You don't have medium-speed flowing corners. It tightens up a bit at the end of the lap. Unless you've ever been to the Hungaroring, you don't really see from any TV pictures just how undulating it is. There's some pretty steep drops here coming out of turn 1, for example. Yeah, and it adds to the sensations for the driver that make it quite enjoyable. You have very little straight line where you're just relying on the grunt of your engine and power unit. So that's really the biggest difference from Silverstone. You do have a lot of what you'd like to call high commitment corners here. And here we've got Zhao on the radio.
Is everything okay? Why am I losing so much energy?
So we have to box. We box the flap, box.
Bit of an unusual issue for Zhao there, as they're going to box and hopefully get back out with a minor issue. Yellow flag in sector 2 somewhere, but I was just saying, yeah, lots of high commitment corners. And Checo's in the barrier. That's not the perfect start, is it? So Sergio Perez off, and it looks like damage to the front left corner of his Red Bull. And this is right at the start of free practice. There's a red flag, so the session is going to be stopped already. And now, of course, Sergio Perez is already under building pressure because he has got issues with qualifying of late. So the car is off at the moment, and we're looking at the team trying to get the feedback from him, Jack. I think that's turn 5, which is a sort of a fast hairpin, if you like, right-hander at the top of the hill, and here's Perez on the radio.
No, I cannot believe this.
I mean, to me that doesn't sound... That sounds like he's a bit stumped and just lost it on cold tyres, potentially.
I tell you what, I cannot believe this, he said. I'm thinking the Red Bull pit wall will be thinking exactly the same. Here's a replay. Jack, talk us through it. So
he pitches into the very fast high-speed turn 4, no issues there, and he just puts a wheel on the grass on the outside going into turn 5. That's, I hate to say it, but that's a rookie error. He just dips his outside wheels on, and of course when you turn in, no grip, the car sparks as he actually hits the floor on the tarmac where the grass drops away from the track, and you're just a passenger at that point.
So what's interesting about this situation is that Sergio Perez has had a really difficult run. Here's his radio.
I clipped the grass, I think, on braking. I just lost it.
He did indeed, as you were saying, Jack. He's had a really difficult run. He's failed to get into the top 10 in qualifying for the last 5 races, which is really appalling for someone in a Red Bull. and the pressure's been mounting on him as a result. And Christian Horner, the team principal, has been saying he thinks that what's happened is that Perez has been putting himself under too much pressure, because after the first 4 races of the season, if you remember, it was 2 wins each between him and Max Verstappen, and he was talking about himself as a genuine championship contender. Not that anyone in Formula One ever thought he would be able to keep it running for an entire season, but he had that in his mind. So when things started to go wrong, according to Horner, that's when he sort of went into this kind of downward spiral. And what Horner was saying after Silverstone was he just needs a clean weekend, and he needed that even more because the pressure's ramped up this weekend because of Daniel Ricciardo's arrival in the second AlphaTauri. Horner said, Checo and Max are our drivers for 2025, sorry, I don't know why I said that. But no one is kidded by that in Formula One. Everybody knows what Red Bull are like. If Perez continues to underperform, and if Ricciardo gets in this AlphaTauri and starts beating Yuki Tsunoda consistently, I don't think anyone would be surprised if Red Bull at the end of the season kicked Perez out and put Ricciardo in the Red Bull again.
So the marshals are on the scene now. There was a bit of runoff there before you get to the barrier, and as he went around, the tyres just dragged across the tarmac, smoke poured from the back of the car. There's a lot of damage to the front left suspension of the car. Christian Horner is on the pit wall, looking a bit forlorn, as you can imagine. And Sergio Perez has acknowledged that the issues that Andrew's been talking about, particularly in qualifying. I mean, race day's been pretty good. He came through from 15th on the grid at Silverstone to 6th place. But what Sergio has said is that I've become a little bit more sensitive to the car on lighter fuel loads. I know it's an issue. Problem is, Jack, we come to the Hungaroring, and last year here at this circuit, guess what he did? He missed out on qualifying in the top 10. He qualified 11th. He missed out by 0.05 of a second, and he hasn't got a particularly great record here at this circuit. So with that start, he's on the back foot already, isn't he?
It's absolutely the last thing he needed, because not only, I mean, obviously a crash is never great at the best of times. The first flying lap of practice, that's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? I mean, he's under a lot of pressure, there's no doubt, but you know, it's as a driver, when you're in that situation and you've got your team manager telling you, just get a clean weekend together, I mean, that's a red flag if ever you need one. Because when you're being told in a top team, in a top car like Red Bull, just have a clean weekend, don't have any big issues, when really, honestly, he should be up there with Max, getting 1-2s, fighting for the podium every weekend, helping them to secure the Constructors' Championship. Of course, he knows and he feels that pressure, and it's a very difficult situation to be in. But he's really not helped himself there. And I did like that the FOM directors immediately put the cameras on the clean AlphaTauri of Daniel Ricciardo going back to pit lane. I'm sure there was a small Aussie smile as he went past that crash site.
So you only have to go back to the start of the season, though, where Sergio Perez, second in the first race to Max Verstappen. But in Saudi, he won. Round 4, Azerbaijan, he won. Second in the 5th round of the championship. And at that point of the season, you started to think, well, actually, there might be a challenge here to Max Verstappen. He was looking all good at that point, and it's just dropped off a cliff, hasn't it?
I mean, I have to agree with Rosanna. I think most of the paddock assumed that, yeah, he was going to give him a bit of a fight for a little bit, and then it was going to drop off, but he'd be close. And we're just seeing the replay again, and it's painful to watch, and there's nothing he can do. He knows the wall's coming, but there's just not enough runoff to save him.
So painful to watch. We've just seen a clip of a small child crying in the crowd wearing Perez's kit. So everybody feeling Sergio's pain, but goodness me, how does he recover now? So the car will go back, Jack, back to the pit lane, and then Sergio will just have to sit on and watch as the time ticks down in this session, I guess. Yep,
so he's got the pretty miserable scooter ride back to the paddock. The damage doesn't look terrible. It's just a front left corner, which these days is actually pretty modular, so the team will be able to whip that off. Check the tub for any damage will be the critical thing. Everything else on there is pretty consumable by all means, but yeah, new front wing, new front left corner hopefully, and he'll be ready to go for practice 2, but it'll need a massive reset mentally for him, of course, and it's just, as we've been saying, a lot of pressure at the moment.
We're looking at his teammate Max Verstappen, and that's part of the problem, I guess, isn't it, that you are up against the best driver in the world at the moment, the double champion, and the guy's on an unbelievable run of form. He's won 23 out of the last 32 Grand Prix. So more than half of the races he's ever won, he's won in the last 16 months. And Red Bull on a pretty unstoppable train at the moment. Max Verstappen rarely makes mistakes as well. And even when he has had to come from further down the field, like here at the Hungaroring, he's able to come through the pack, isn't he? He's went from 10th on the grid. He went in Belgium last year from 14th on the grid as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, with Checo coming through the field at Silverstone to, was it P6 in the end? I mean, yeah, okay, good fight back. In the Red Bull, he should be able to get to the podium. And that's what we'd expect of Max, isn't it? And I think, you just have to be held to a higher standard in that car.
We've got some rain starting to fall, so that's not ideal. You have this programme that you want to run through. You have your ideas of how you're going to go about practice session. It gets stopped almost straight away, and then the rain has started to come down now. It might be one of those days today. I think the weather is set to get better as the weekend goes on, but it could be a bit of a messy day today. And the session is just about to resume in less than a minute's time, so cars starting to head down the pit lane.
They're going to try and squeeze out a lap on slicks, aren't they, before the rain really takes hold, because they do need that data quite badly, a lot of the teams.
Crowds now standing up in the grandstands and putting on coats, and one or two of them putting brollies up as well. It might just be a passing shower, but this is a circuit that does dry out pretty quickly normally. It's a circuit, it's a permanent circuit, but it's one that doesn't actually get used that much across the course of the season. So even if it's a wholly dry weekend, it can be a little bit dusty at the start of the weekend. It gets better and better, doesn't it? It grips up as the weekend goes on. Yeah, absolutely. The track evolution is always big here. They do get some pretty weird and wonderful races going there. I encourage people to have a look at the Hungarian website. I've had to do it for testing purposes, and there's all sorts going racing there, but not often high-level single-seaters, so rubber is pretty low when they start the weekend here. Now, because one of the big stories, probably the biggest story of Silverstone 2 weeks ago, Andrew, was the rise of McLaren, who picked up more points in one weekend than they picked up for the whole 9 races before that, and ended a 27 race run without finishing on the podium, with Lando Norris leading for a point the race, and the cheer and the roar at Silverstone was unbelievable when he got the lead of the race. And Oscar Piastri, excellent drive as well, 4th in the end. He got a bit unlucky with the pit stops and the safety car. He could well have been 3rd. He was very much on the pace, but this is a very different track. It's all high-speed turns at Silverstone. Do you think the McLaren will struggle a bit more around here with some of the lower speed corners?
Well, they introduced an upgrade in Austria, Chris, and the car went very well there. Lando Norris just missed out on the podium in Austria, and then he did make it onto the podium in Silverstone, as you said. But even McLaren themselves don't think they'll be as strong. Here's Ricciardo's radio.
Okay, we have a very light result starting.
Where is it coming from? What corner will be the worst first?
Pit straight, so last corner on turn 1.
So it's just Ricciardo being warned about the rain that's starting to fall. Basically the drivers were saying that the McLaren is still the same car, it's just got more downforce, and the same car means that it's good in the high speed, as you were saying, Chris, not so good in low speed corners. And as we've been discussing already, lots of low and medium speed corners at the Hungaroring, so they're expecting to not be as competitive, but it definitely has moved the car forward. The question is, where does that sort of pack behind Red Bull, how does it all fall into place? Because you've got Aston Martin, who are kind of like the opposite of McLaren in a way now. Their car's really good in slow and medium speed corners, as we saw from Fernando Alonso's performances in Monaco and Canada, for example. But they've had a couple of difficult races in Austria and Silverstone. Then you've got Mercedes again, not good in the high speed, but better in the medium and low speed. Ferrari, not good in the high speed, better in the medium and low speed, but they've got problems with tyre degradation usually, and it's expected to be hot on Sunday for the race. So Aston Martin, Mercedes, Ferrari, and now McLaren, they're all in a little gang competing to be best of the rest. And who's going to come out on top this weekend and over the rest of the season is kind of like the only story that's left this season, with Max Verstappen walking away with the championship.
Yeah, and Alonso is a driver with fond memories of the Hungaroring, because 20 years ago, this is where he got his first ever Grand Prix win. I mean, half the grid hadn't even gone to school at that point, had they? So he's already said that we expect to be on the pace here, back on the pace after a slightly subdued Silverstone 2 weeks ago. The rain has really started to hammer it down now at the circuit, and one of the Alphas has gone off the road, as we've been looking at Kevin Magnussen. So that's just a trip to the grass. They're all on slick tyres, of course, as well. Gets back on the road now, Valtteri Bottas, but he's on the medium tyre. Most of them have gone out on the mediums. They've all gone out on slick tyres of some description or another. Albon has gone out on the soft tyre. Tsunoda has gone out on the soft tyre as well, and Lando Norris on the soft tyre, and a couple of others, but most of them out on the mediums. Doesn't matter really, because whether it's soft, medium or hard, there's zero grip when you get the rain like it's coming down now, Razan.
They're all heading back into the pit lane now, keen to get rid of those tyres. Let's hear from Bottas.
Undrivable.
Yep, can see it now. Yep.
Yeah, we saw Valtteri going off the track, managed to get it back onto the black stuff, and he's now back into the pit lane. And perhaps I'll just wait a little bit, because maybe this will be a passing shower, although it does look pretty heavy out there.
Even if it's a passing shower, it's going to rob quite a lot of grip and temperature from the surface of the track. And we just get a replay now of Bottas coming into the corner, quite a lot of rain coming down. He deliberately slips the front of the car to try and get understeer, but as soon as he gets on the power, it just starts to turn around on him, and it's quite a clumsy spin in the end. But
very low speed, sort of 180 spin, wasn't it? But there's nobody around him, so no harm done. And just like that, we've lost already 15 minutes. A quarter of the session has gone, and nobody's actually achieved anything yet.
No, not great, with the stoppage from Checo Perez, and now with the rain falling, and Checo is now back in the garage talking to his engineers. We've had a bit of a question using the hashtag BBCF1, and I'm going to put this question to you, Andrew. We know that Red Bull are bringing upgrades this weekend. We know they've brought them perhaps throughout the season already, and we know they've been penalised for breaking the budget and going over the budget a couple of years ago. There are now rumours that there are other teams who allegedly have broken the cost cap, and Chris has asked, please can I ask Andrew if he knows the 3 teams who have allegedly broken the cost cap this year, or perhaps last year. Come on, Andrew.
Give us the goss.
You just given me the hospital pass, haven't you, Rosanna? Thanks for that.
Well, you might not know, and therefore you can say.
Yes, the listener is absolutely right. There are rumours around at the moment, and have been for a few weeks actually, that a number of teams may have broken the cost cap again in 2022, because if people remember the punishment that Red Bull got last October, which was a $10 million fine and $7.5 million fine and a 10% reduction in wind tunnel research and aerodynamic research. That was for the 2021 season. At the time, everybody was saying, well, if Red Bull got things wrong in 2021, it took so long for the budget cap to be resolved in 2022 that they're liable to have done the same thing in 2022, because they'll have been using the same accountancy practices to do that. Now, I can't confirm that Red Bull are one of the teams that are being investigated at the moment. I can't confirm any names, unfortunately, but there are names going around. But it would be wrong of me to say what they are right now.
You'd be useless on the playground, Benson, honestly.
I have to be a responsible journalist.
Far too much integrity, I know. It's terrible.
Well, let's be honest, it's a very serious allegation.
No, absolutely. You're completely right. Yeah. And it's quite a contentious issue as well. There was a lot of furore around the Red Bull incident when that came out. So, yeah, the teams will tread carefully on this one,
what I would say is, and this is not to say that it is Red Bull or that Red Bull, one of the names floating around, but if it was Red Bull again, I think the reaction in the paddock would be apoplectic. I mean, they were pretty angry last year, but if it happens 2 years in a row, the likes of Toto Wolff and Ferrari are going to be throwing their weight around as much as they possibly can, and they will be expecting a much more severe punishment than happened last year, because they thought that last year's punishment wasn't really enough. They felt that the negotiations that went on between Red Bull and the FIA, in their minds, allowed Red Bull to get off lightly. Red Bull claim, it was Christian Horner has repeated the number of £400,000 in reality of what the breach was, even though the FIA said it was 1.8. What Horner's referring to there, this is for 2021, is there was a line in the judgment that had they applied a notional tax credit, then it might have been, then the overspend might have been 400,000 as opposed to 1.8 million. The thing was, notional means theoretical, so you don't know that they would have got that tax credit, so you can't claim that number as 400,000 with any veracity. The number was 1.8 million is what they breached it by in 2021. So we don't know what's going to happen this year, but the investigations by the FIA are going on, Rosanna. A number of teams are having deeper investigations being done. That process will take some time yet, so unfortunately the listeners and myself will just have to be patient.
Well, all I know is that when we do find out if there was a breach, you will be the first to know about it, Andrew Benson, and you'll be able to read all about it on the F1 section of the BBC Sport website. Might even make a headline on the BBC Sport website. Don't you reckon, Andrew?
I don't know whether I'll be the first to know about it, Rosanna. Thank you for the compliment.
But you're a man on the ground.
No pressure.
As far as we're concerned.
I'm going to just stop talking about this now.
It's going very red.
I can draw our attention to something else that's definitely not controversial.
Please do, Jack.
Ricciardo is P3 and ahead of Tsunoda, so he's a shoe-in for Red Bull in 2024, right?
Yeah. He's taken a photo of that,
I mean,
that timing.
Yeah, quick, post that on Twitter, Instagram, send it to Helmut Marko. Look, done the job.
This is the order they went out. Nobody's actually set a lap time yet. Russell's top, Albon's second, Ricciardo's third, but Tsunoda's fourth. So, he's keeping him on his toes, isn't he, his teammate?
Of course, there was a big question as to why Ricciardo was chosen over and above other people in the Red Bull family. And actually, I'm just seeing Liam Lawson sitting on the pit wall of AlphaTauri. He obviously was in contention, but they chose not to bring him in, Andrew. Is that being careful not to plunge a rookie into an F1 seat mid-season, or is it because he's got his Super Formula duties? Was that wise not to bring him in?
Well, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, he is in the Super Formula and he is doing well in that championship. And Pierre Gasly is a previous Red Bull driver who went over to Japan and took part in that championship. And in the end, he didn't get to complete it the year he was in it because he got drafted into a Formula 1 team to replace Brendan Hartley, but who was fired. Another Red Bull driver who was fired in the course of the season. I think. The fact of the matter is they felt that De Vries had reached the end of the road. Whether you agree with that decision or not doesn't really matter. That's what Helmut Marko and Christian Horner decided. And Daniel Ricciardo was kind of the guy next in line because he's been their reserve driver all year. They've seen his improvement in the simulator. And so I think really that all they needed was confirmation that the simulator performances were going to be reflected on track. So they put him in the Red Bull at Silverstone last week to Pirelli tyre test, and I think Christian Horner said it basically within 4 laps he knew. So Ricciardo was obviously pretty impressive. Jack?
I mean, this is obviously all opinion because we do not have access to the data that Red Bull do when they're making these decisions. But I have to say, I find it very difficult to believe that this decision was made based on sim pace and testing pace. The testing I can maybe wrap my head around a little bit more, but the sim pace I'll explain. Every team, of course, puts a lot of effort and resource into their simulators, and equally they have usually a nice roster of drivers, usually younger drivers, to drive those sims, and they are used for evaluation as well, to a point, because a simulator will never be the same as driving the real car. As advanced as they are, and they are worth a lot of money now, these simulators, you are lacking some massively crucial elements to driving a car, like G-force. You cannot replicate sustained G-force. It's a massive part of how a driver feels grip in the car, and therefore how he is quick in real life. So you are not always going to be able to transfer pace from the sim to real life. Hence why I find it difficult to believe that Red Bull would just put all their trust in that. On the testing, there was a lot of sort of quick takes going around on Twitter saying, Ricciardo did a time that would have been good enough for X position on the grid of Silverstone. It's complete rubbish. They were doing a testing program with different tyres on a different day. Yes, it was the same circuit, but the circuit changes. It's a living beast. The tarmac gets hotter, colder, takes rubber, loses rubber. The wind changes, the air pressure, and all of these things can make you faster or slower. And for that reason, I cannot believe that they were really looking for performance in that test. They might have been looking to say, yeah, okay, he's in the ballpark. He looks pretty good. The way that the telemetry is shaping up is nice, but you can't draw absolute comparisons.
So what are you implying?
I'm implying that they knew what Ricciardo was really worth as a driver, and this is an opportunity for them to put him back in the car and to test out those theories. That's all they can really run on. They have some indications from things like the simulator, the testing in the Pirelli test, but they're never going to know for sure until they put him in the real car, and they're willing to do that because, as you say, De Vries had reached the end of the road as far as they're concerned. Why they took Ricciardo over Lawson is an open question.
Yeah, and I think Lawson has said, yeah, I'm okay with it because my plan was only ever to come into Formula 1 or hope to come into Formula 1 next year.
Nice and steady, please. A little bit more rain in the air now.
Alpine's team radio to Esteban Ocon, who's just gone out on the intermediate tyre. Had one car venture out for one lap on the intermediates, which was Sir Lewis Hamilton, and he came straight back in. So Esteban's gone out now. He's the only car on track at the moment, but it is still raining. The track doesn't look like it's got a lot of standing water, but certainly nowhere near slick tyres at the moment. But yeah, Lawson has said, look, I'm okay with the decision. I'm concentrating on Super Formula. He won the last race at Fuji. He's only a point behind the championship lead now. And it would be difficult, wouldn't it, to come straight into the middle of a season in a car which is not the most competitive, let's say. Maybe not as bad as the results show at the moment, but you all know about this because you did exactly the same thing. You came into the Grand Prix right in the middle of the season. You jump at the opportunity if you get it, but it is difficult, isn't it?
Of course. Look, Lawson's saying all the right things because he's being professional, and of course you have to when you're in that position and your employer has made a decision that hasn't gone your way. But he will be pretty devastated, I'm sure. I also don't really buy what Christian was saying about, it would be unfair to put him in the car at this point. I'm sure Liam's screaming in the background saying, I don't care, it's fine, put me in. This is what every driver lives for, to have those opportunities to grab him by the scruff of the neck and say, this is what I'm capable of. And after all, Red Bull have done it plenty of times before. The real reasons for why they've chosen Ricciardo over Lawson, who knows? But I don't buy that it's that.
I have a theory, if you want to hear it. I've watched Red Bull and the way they operate for a long time, and I know how they react to drivers underperforming, and I think they've already got serious doubts about Perez. I think, knowing how Helmut Marko thinks, or having seen how he reacts to situations, they feel quite often when drivers get into a spiral like this, or where they constantly underperforming, making mistakes. Perez has done this quite a number of times this year. He even did it in Australia, if you remember, in the third race before this downward spiral started. They feel that drivers never get out of them unless they're put in a different situation. Now, again, you can agree or disagree with that situation. Others might try and put their arm around a driver and help them out of it. That's not how Red Bull behave normally. It's happened over and over and over again with them. It happened with Brendan Hartley. It happened with Pierre Gasly when he got put into the senior team from the junior team. It happened with Daniel Kvyat. It happened with Alex Albon. And all the signs are, to me, and I could be completely wrong, the signs to me are that they've got very serious concerns about whether Perez can bring himself out of this spiral, and they're looking for escape routes, options, in case he can't. And Ricciardo didn't do very well at McLaren, but as far as Red Bull are concerned, he was an exceptional driver for them. And I think they'll be thinking, if we can get the old Daniel Ricciardo back, then that's an option if Perez can't get himself out of this slump.
But do you see it being a switch? So
yes,
Perez goes to AlphaTauri and Daniel goes to Red Bull, or actually Perez would then be removed from the Red Bull family and Liam would then... That would be up to Red Bull and Perez, wouldn't it, to discuss it? But it could happen at any time. So Horner was saying Max and Checo are our drivers for 2024. Just ignore that.
How many times have we heard a quote, and then 2 weeks later it's all different?
Exactly.
So
you just don't pay any attention to anything he says on that subject. So it could be for the start. It might not happen at all. If it happens, it could be for the start of next season. It could be at some point this season later on, if Ricciardo performs well and Perez continues on this downward trend.
I mean, there's a financial aspect to this as well, isn't there? In not looking at Red Bull, but looking at the team that he's driving for, Daniel Ricciardo, AlphaTauri, because they're plumb bottom of the Constructors' Championship now. And I know it's not the best car in the world, but it's been in the points with Yuki earlier in the season. It should be higher up than 10th out of 10 in the Constructors' Championship. They want to get up the order and get more prize.
Well, that's the question. The problem is Red Bull will be thinking we don't know how good that car is, because the drivers in it have been Nick De Vries, who we've just sacked, and Yuki Tsunoda, who we don't really have a lot of faith in, because if we had faith in them, we wouldn't be... They would have looked at the De Vries-Tsunoda situation in a different way around. They would be thinking, well, Tsunoda's up to his game. De Vries was only like 1.18 or something on average in qualifying behind him, even if it was 10-2 overall on merit. They'd be thinking, well, Tsunoda's like a gold standard, gives De Vries time, but they don't think Tsunoda's a gold standard. So they're looking for someone to see how good that car can be. I think they believe it's probably not as bad as those two drivers have made it look.
I think it comes back to Red Bull are constantly looking for the next big thing, aren't they? They're constantly looking for Vettel, Max V2.0, and so the standards that they hold are extremely high, so they always have a lot of doubts over a lot of their drivers in their roster. I'd say they even have doubts over Liam Lawson, and that's partly why they haven't let to the chance to put him in a seat, because if he was really a big superstar in their eyes, then they would have done, rather than put Ricciardo in.
I think it looks to me like Liam Lawson's not going to get a chance, not a serious chance, because I think he'd have been in the Formula 1 car already by now. He's done Formula 2, he's looked pretty decent in Formula 2, they farmed him off to Japan. It doesn't look like a guy who they've really grabbed massive faith in and want to promote quickly. What do you think, Jack?
No, I agree with that. I think he did a pretty good job in Formula 2. He had a very good start to his final championship year in that series, but then failed to kick on and really mount a serious challenge. And he's having a very good year in Super Formula, but it's all been rather quiet about Liam Lawson in the Red Bull camp. You don't hear them pushing him forward, and it's noticeable, yeah.
Well, the sound you were just hearing there was the Ferrari team just doing a quick pit stop practice for Charles Leclerc. He's just been out on track on the intermediates. Rain is still falling. His teammate Carlos Sainz was out a little earlier on, getting a little bit skittish out and about around the track. So it's tricky conditions, and a lot of the drivers preferring to stay put. And I imagine that's because they think the rest of the weekend will be dry, but maybe just wanting to have a feel on these intermediate tyres and see how they behave.
Yeah, there's two trains of thought. One is, I guess, don't risk anything. What's the point? You're not going to learn anything about the car. You're not going to set any quick times. But we've had Hamilton, Ocon and Leclerc have all gone out, done a lap on intermediates, very tentative lap, and come straight back in. George Russell getting his helmet on now. The other thing is, the way of looking at it, Jack, though, is at some point, this might happen in qualifying. So we need to know at which point we switch from slick tyres to intermediates, or from intermediates to wet. So it can be good data, but I guess it comes with a risk, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's an age-old question, isn't it? Some drivers like to get out there in those suboptimal conditions because, like you say, we might have that later in the weekend when it really counts, and then having that experience will help. And then others may feel that it's not worth the risk, or that they've experienced that kind of thing before and it's easy enough to adapt to. These days, it is a bit easier. The teams have pretty powerful tools to know when that crossover point is coming. And they've got that prediction down to a fine art, I would say, so that it's less become the feel of the pants button style decision that we used to see a decade or two ago. But some will definitely prefer to get out there and feel it for themselves anyway.
Just seen pictures of Adrian Newey, the Chief Technical Officer at Red Bull, inspecting one of his cars. There's ponchos up now in the grandstands, 1 or 2 cans of beer as well to try and keep themselves warm, but it is coming down heavier than previously now. We have got one car on track at the moment though, and it's Oscar Piastri, who is now achieved with his 4th place finish at Silverstone. The equal 4th best ever result in a Grand Prix for a rookie driver, and 3 drivers, including, of course, in his first season, Lewis Hamilton, have ever beaten a 4th place finish. So he's gone out on the intermediate tyre, but he catches a big slide there and gets out onto the curbs. And that was coming out of turn 4 into 5. He gets on the accelerator, the car dances and twitches and slides. He comes over the crest, and that just caught his attention a little bit, didn't it?
It was brilliant, bit of car control. As you come up over the crest of turn 4, he's drifting out of the chicane as well. Now he's just showing off, honestly. But he's clearly having fun out there. Now, as you come over the crest of the very fast turn 4, the car does go light, and it's sort of almost, you sort of fall onto the exit curve, which is of course painted and completely slick. And he did it as he was getting onto the power, had a massive snap very quickly, and another one coming out of turn 9. He's just very comfortable with the car, clearly.
Yeah, and I would say that's wet now. That's not damp anymore, is it? He's properly thrown it down. There's a lot more surface water suddenly. We're going to see a replay, super slow-mo replay of this, Jack. Now, this is all about feel in these conditions, isn't it?
Yeah, the best drivers love these conditions because no 2 rain sessions are the same, so you're constantly having to just guess and feel and predict what the grip's doing. And we're going to get a replay of him coming through turn 4, pitches it in, of course guessing because this is the first time he's been out in the wet, gets on the power and a big slide. That's good angle for a Formula 1 car. Chapeau.
Yeah, right on the curbs as well. And he rode the curbs at the next corner. We get in the car, bouncing up and down there. Rain really coming down now in slow motion shot. It's seen working away at the wheel of the car. The car which had the upgrades, of course, over the last couple of rounds. Oscar's sort of one behind Lando in terms of upgrades. He didn't have the front wing, but most of the performance benefits that they had seem to come from the redesign of the underside of the cars. We get team radio.
I think it's too strong rain to keep going. We will box this lap if you agree.
I wouldn't say I agree, but I'm happy to box.
So Lando being brought back into the McLaren garage now. This track, I mean, it's normally spicy hot weather-wise. Obviously, a hot part of Europe, but then we were talking about this on the Checkered Flag podcast, that we are now seeing a lot of rain when we go to Hungary as well, and it always kicks up a little bit. And we've had a message in from Rich on Twitter saying, my wildest memory of this track is Hamilton being the only car to start the race. Could it be as exciting this year? We have had some weird ones here, haven't we, with a few different things thrown into the mix.
Yeah, there's something about the topography of this track that seems to encourage that kind of those localized showers, and it is always quite hot traditionally in the summer, of course, in the calendar, and we're experiencing a heat wave in Europe, as we all know. So I think the teams will be quite thankful for a bit of rain, but it's quite possible that we have this changeable weather carrying on. I think forecasting has been more and more difficult through this summer, with the weather being very unpredictable, very changeable. So we'd love to see a bit of that over the weekend. It will certainly make the racing a bit more interesting. There is a water park on the back end of the circuit, which I think teams always joke, should we go for a little dip later on? Of course, they work far too hard for that, but it's nice to dream.
It's often here that you see the drivers in their ice baths at the back, because it is so hot, especially in F2 and F3, down in their sort of paddock, which is a bit further down from the F1 area, and they're all keeping cool usually. They're not needing that today. It is pretty grey and wet. We're just seeing Pierre Gasly being pushed back into the Alpine garage. I mean, that's a team that when we talk about P2, because obviously P2 is really up for grabs at the moment, we talk about Mercedes, we talk about Aston Martin, Ferrari, but actually Alpine had that Monaco podium for Esteban Ocon. A bit of a difficult one in Silverstone for them, but they should be in that pack really as well.
Yeah, Pierre Gasly was having a really good run at Silverstone. He was pretty impressive, actually. And then he had, a couple of comings together with Lance Stroll, one of which gave him a puncture, which dropped him out of the points in the end. But they've been super reliable as well, because Pierre had 21 consecutive races finishing a race. He'd not had a retirement for almost a full season. The only driver that's been better than that is, of course, Max Verstappen. So, yeah, the car looked pretty good at Silverstone. Pierre was driving it well, was really unlucky not to get in the points there. But you're right, they should be up there. They might try something different if we get a dry race, which it sounds like we will, because last year, although it always used to be one-stop strategy around the Hungaroring, it's sort of switched and shifted the last couple of years to more of a two-stop. But both of the Alpines last year went on a one-stop strategy.
I'm just seeing Sergio Perez's car being taken off the back of a low loader. Mechanics are there with the famous sort of tarpaulin that they like to cover the car with so no one can spy. And of course, they've got these upgrades on the car. They do not want the spy photographers getting a shot of that. We saw that in Monaco, didn't we, with the cars being hoisted high by the cranes, and Toto Wolff and Christian Horner sort of joking about how much visibility was given to the underside of their cars. Now, we've got 22 and 54 seconds left on the clock. That's not a lot of time for the Red Bull mechanics to work on that car. They're going to be flat chat between FP1 and FP2, aren't they?
The crucial thing will be if there's any damage to the mounting points of the suspension where they join the carbon monocoque. And it is pretty sturdy. They make them strong on purpose. But if you do have damage to those points, then it could be quite a serious repair job. If there's not, then it could be as simple as bolting on a new front left corner and front wing. Obviously, they'll be hoping that there's no damage to the left-hand side pod there, which is part of the upgrade package that they've brought, which has gained so much attention. But we won't know until we get to the start of FP2. That'll be well wrapped in the garage and under an army of mechanics, I think.
Yeah, you mentioned that, Rosanna, and there was a quote. It's quite open about it. The McLaren obviously leap in performance at Silverstone, which wasn't just a couple of tenths, it was more like a second. Sparked a bit of interest with the other teams, as you can imagine, and Mercedes technical director James Allison said, we keep an eye on all the teams as they upgrade. We take, and he was open about this, we take lots of photos and we try and figure out what they've changed from race to race. And the unusual thing about McLaren is the upgrade and its big leap in time that they had. So they're always looking, always spying, aren't they, Andrew, and trying to just look what the opposition are doing, because it's a moving target. They'll all be bringing out upgrades. They'll all be trying to improve as the season goes on. The car you start the year with is totally different to the one you end the year with.
That's right, and the teams have already had a chance to see the underside of the Red Bull at Monaco, of course, when Perez crashed there, which didn't impress the team, and he's just gone and done it again. And I think the tarpaulin was probably a little bit too late, because there were plenty of photographers out at turn 5 where the car was lifted up in the air again by a crane. Those remarks by James Allison were quite interesting, I thought, last week, because one of the questions about Mercedes at the moment is, why haven't they been able to make the same quantum leap forward as Aston Martin did over the winter, for example, and as McLaren have now done in the mid-season? Now, we think the answer is because the fundamental architecture of their car prevents them doing a kind of Red Bull copy for want of a better way of describing it. The cockpit's a little bit further forward, the side impact structures are in a different place, the front suspension mounting points are in a different place. So part of the explanation is that they can't turn the 2023 Mercedes into that kind of car. But the follow-on question from that is, do they actually understand what Red Bull have done and why the Red Bull works so well? Because when you talk to Toto Wolff, the team principal at Mercedes, he says, well, we had the Red Bull design in the wind tunnel quite early on, and we saw a loss of downforce, not a gain of downforce. So that does raise the question, well, but then, just check myself there. When you speak to Dan Fallows at Aston Martin, for example, the new technical director there, or Andrea Stella, the team principal at McLaren, they're very open about when you start to pursue that design philosophy, you very quickly see how much development you're going to be able to do with it, how much performance you're going to gain. So why can they see it but Mercedes can't? And we don't have an answer to that question yet. And I guess we're not going to have an answer to that question until next year. Is there something fundamentally wrong inside Mercedes at the moment that they just can't understand what makes these ground effect Formula 1 cars fast? Or is it just simply that they can't do it this year because of the failings of the car? We don't know.
Do you know what, just going back to the spy photography, I had an interview with James Moy, one of the F1 photographers, and he's very bashful about whether he does or doesn't do spy photography. I think the photographers like to keep up the down low about what their projects are, shall we say, on a F1 race weekend. But I love the concept of that, out and about, trying to get a picture of a Formula 1 car, or at least the underside of it, as Valtteri Bottas is out on intermediates now, a little bit skittish as well. Lots of spray being kicked up there, isn't there, Chris?
There is. It's a little bit light. There's a bit of a break in the cloud, so it might ease. Drivers are getting ready to get out there and do something, but even though he's on his own, there's a big plume of spray coming off the back of the Alfa.
It's okay, low grip, but for now drivable.
Yeah, low grip, that's the understatement of the century, isn't it? He looks pretty nailed, pretty smooth though in the Alfa Romeo as he tackles the corner. Standing water-wise here at this circuit, it's coming out of turn 1 down to turn 2. It's a steep drop, as we mentioned. If you get a lot of rain, you can actually get a stream running down there, can't you, Jack?
It can happen in a few places here because of that elevation change. Also coming out of turn 3, which is flat in the dry but not flat in the wet and quite tricky. And spray's been a hot topic recently. We've seen people, or rather not just people, the boffins at the FIA and in Formula 1 have been looking at solutions to try and reduce spray because the visibility in these cars is so poor now. And that's because of the aerodynamics that lift the water up off the air, creating that rooster tail, which is pretty iconic now with Formula 1, but it does create those issues. And they've looked to almost put a mud guard, for want of a better word, on the back of the rear of the car, over the tyres, to try and keep that spray down. And they've looked at other solutions as well. It's kind of a work in progress, because I think a lot of the spray does come from the floor as well, and the diffuser. But we can see it even now with Bottas, in not the wettest of conditions, but just one car going around. It's a lot of spray, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, Mercedes has been involved in trying to develop that mudguard technology you mentioned. There's a lot of standing water, though, as we trap Bottas. We're in danger of getting a lap time here for the first time in free practice with 17 minutes to go. We get an onboard shot now from the helmet cam of Bottas as he works his way through the left and then the right at turns 8 and 9. There's elevation change here in the middle of the lap as well, so all the weight shifts from the back of the car to the front. He snap steers through the left-hander at turn 10 into turn 11, which is normally a very high-speed corner in 5th gear. You have to be very tricky and very tentative there, isn't he?
It's a fearsome corner, that in the wet. I've no shame in saying I've ended up in the barrier there. And it was in wet conditions like this. It's another one of those that is completely flat in the dry, but in the wet it does require a bit of a lift, and you can get some nasty rivers there as well. But Bottas wrestling the car around, and big slide as he comes out of the penultimate corner, but keeps it more or less straight, and he will set a lap time here.
Yeah, coming out of turn 14, and he gets on the gas. He goes up through the gears, and it's a 1 minute 47.787 second lap. The first lap recorded of the session, with almost 3/4 of the session complete. Jack, you've won around here in Formula Renault and in Formula 3 as well, been on the podium in Formula 2. It is, when we get to the race, it's a hard track to overtake on, but it's not impossible, is it?
No, it isn't, especially with the advent of DRS, and more importantly than that, perhaps this is a track where tyre degradation can play a pretty big factor because of all the things that we've mentioned before, of it, how it's so tight and twisty, and you have so many corners one after the other, bang, bang, bang. The tyres get very hot, and if you don't get a good exit out of that last corner, which goes on forever, it makes you very vulnerable into turns 1 and turn 3, or is it turn 2? Sorry, I get confused. Turn 2. So yeah, the drivers do have opportunities. It is a challenge though.
I'm just looking at the spray being kicked up on the start-finish straight. They're out on the inters. Do you think they should be trying a set of full wets, or is it not worth it given it's FP1?
Traditionally, they will try to run that into in as broad a range of wet conditions as possible, because it's just such a better performing tyre than the wet. And this has been talked about before. A big slide from Ricciardo as he sets out for his first lap, and we've got a Ferrari in the wall.
Yep, it is the Carlos Sainz car, which is now beached on the curb. So Sainz, that's the same part of the course where Perez went off, isn't it? That run through turn 4, and he's beached it and he's stalled it.
I tell you what, if he's kept it out of the barrier there, which it looks like he has, he's just beached himself. That's a scary moment, because there's a very fast corner coming out onto that back straight, and the walls are very close. We've seen some big accidents there in the past, but yeah, not great for Ferrari.
Yeah, so he spun to the outside of the circuit. The back of the car is on the grass. The middle of the car is right beached on the quite steep curb there as well. And the front of the car, pointed at a 90-degree angle to the circuit, is all over the circuit as well. We've seen Fred Vasseur looking a bit frustrated on the pit wall, and another red flag in the session.
You can just see the tyre marks in the background there. It looks like he's made very light contact with the barrier, but here's his radio.
Yeah, I'm stuck. Yeah, copy.
It's not the curb you wanted to get stuck on, was it? Because it's the pretty steep one, that. So he's got no chance of getting out of that. Marshals are now there. We're seeing onboard pictures facing Carlos Sainz. We're going to get a replay now, Jack, of just where it went wrong and how.
So out of turn 2, through turn 3 on the dry line, hits a little river, but gets through that fine, and it's actually after the river when he gets on the power a bit more confidently and just skims along the barrier. So very, very light contact. He's just on the grass, tries to get going, but doesn't have enough momentum to get over the curb.
Yeah, it's a bit earlier than the Perez. It was before he got to turn 4, more coming out of turn 3. And yeah, I think the car will probably be okay, won't it? It was a very light kiss of the barrier, square on as well.
It was a bit heavier than it looked from inside the cockpit when we saw the outside images, but should be okay. I'm sure that they'll get it on what they call the flat patch to make sure everything's straight and true, but he's actually gotten going again. The marshals have managed to push him over, so obviously nothing majorly wrong with the car.
Thinking of me and my road car there getting stuck on a sort of sleeping policeman, as we like to call them. Worrying about the sump of my car. Yeah.
Don't you have some?
What do you drive? A Lamborghini?
Well, it's very low, very low. No, I wish. But it was
a Range Rover?
I do, and other brands are available.
How did you get beached on a sleeping policeman in a Range Rover?
I'm thinking of my old cars. I remember my dad lowered his Passat back in the day, and as he used to come into my old school, there were these little speed bumps. And as we hear from Sainz, probably got a similar story.
Check the car, I had a slight contact. Yeah, we are checking things all okay for now.
Oh, as a little, his front wing end plate is underneath his front left tyre, so there is a little bit of damage there for the Ferrari. Just to finish my story, yes, we used to clunk over these speed bumps as we came into school, and it was mortifying because everyone looked as the bottom of this VW started to get sort of attacked.
I want to see this lowered Passat. That sounds amazing.
I'm imagining all sorts of things, and the blaring exhaust, the wheel, massive off-camber wheel.
That's John O'Tennant to a T, I tell you that.
Please tell me it was the estate version as well.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, perfect.
So it was your dad that beached the Passat, the car, on the right, not you, okay.
Yeah, used to scrape over it. And actually, I've done the same on a stage in Rally Finland, actually. In my hire car, I took out the oil sump. We went over a stone, a rock.
Hire car?
Yeah.
Impressive.
Yeah, we were out in Onyanpoja. That's probably not how you say it. But
full insurance was taken, hopefully.
Yeah, they had to come and collect the car.
Oh.
Yeah, it was awful. It was awful. Took all the budget for my rallying that year. Not my actual rally, but my following rally.
Yeah.
There we go.
Now you're banned from hiring a car from anywhere. So this is frustrating for everybody. We've had 3 lap times set. Logan Sargent quickest of all, 1 minute 46.838. Last year in a dry free practice one, Carlos Sainz was quickest in the Ferrari with a 1 minute 18.7. So we're nearly 30 seconds slower. That's how wet it is out there. Alex Albon set a time as well, 1 minute 47.407, and Valtteri Bottas was first to set a time with a 1 minute 47.787. But more cars now heading out onto the circuit. First to lead them out is the Haas of Nico Hülkenberg, who's got a platinum blonde hairstyle this weekend. He's gone all Alex Albon, Jacques Villeneuve of the late 1990s.
No, he's gone Ken
and Barbie to promote the film.
And he said he didn't even know it was out, and it's just coincided, and he's creating some headlines. It's giving us stuff to talk about.
He said his driving wasn't creating enough headlines, so the hair was the way to do it, didn't he? Bless him.
He looks good.
If he's driving a pink car in the paddock, he's gone too far.
I thought it was a mistake.
He's
a good-looking guy, Nico Hülkenberg. I don't think that hair does anything for him.
Do you know what? I think he's carrying it off with aplomb. But I like it when the drivers show a bit of flair and a bit of character. Don't you? Do you think he says hop in to anyone for his car?
Anything new is interesting, but I just don't think the uber blonde look really works.
I'm with Benson. I think the novelty factor is there, but not the right move long term.
Note to self, dye my hair in the break between FP1 and FP2.
You're a different story, Rosanna. We're talking about Nico here. This is, it's just not for him,
As a proud bald man, I'm staying well out of this conversation. I dyed my hair platinum blonde once, actually, only because I knew I was about to shave it all off, and it didn't really matter.
That might be Nico's next hairstyle.
It went a bit orange rather than blonde. It wasn't quite what I was looking for.
We're almost in a majority, Chris, aren't we? So,
yes, almost, exactly right, almost, even Stevens. So Lando's gone out. He wanted to go out earlier, so more cars heading out onto the track. Less than 10 minutes to go. He gets a big twitch on as well as he gets on the throttle and tries to unleash 1,000 brake horsepower, but it's all very twitchy. It rattles over the curbs as well. They're not seemingly too shy of going on the curbs here at the Hungaroring. Some circuits you want to be careful on the curbs in the wet, don't you?
You do like to use the curbs here just because although they look quite scary and big, they actually offer quite a lot of grip, and they're not too, how do I say this? They vibrate the car, but they're not too bumpy, so you can actually get away with quite a lot on them. Lando, seen in the past, he has quite a karting style in the wet where he does like to use the curbs a lot to help rotate the car, almost jump it into turning through the corner, and he does it again in going into the final sector, gets all over the apex curb in an effort to get the car around, and again he's always hooking the car on the curb at the apex of the corner and sticking to a very, very tight line.
Yeah, he's fully over the curb, wasn't he? Almost four wheels over the curb there on the way through turn 12. The right-hander is coming out of turn 14 now. Over the grid hatchings he goes. It's a relatively short straight, this, and it's pretty much the only piece of straight on the entire circuit. However, this is one of the longest runs to turn 1, over 400 metres from pole position. So the start here is going to be crucial. We saw Lewis Hamilton last year in the race making a really good start and gaining 2 places off the line to go from 7th to 5th. So Norris is starting now what will be his first time lap of the session. We've still only got Sargent, Albon and Bottas that have recorded a time.
I thought you were about to say when Lewis Hamilton had a great start to be P1 into turn 1 when he was the only car on the grid. It's like, that was a good start, wasn't it? But we're seeing a lot of slipping and sliding from Lando as we're following him around his first flying lap, again using a lot of curb at turn 4. And the question of inters versus wet, a lot of the slipping and sliding is actually coming in the traction zone as he does it again on the exit of turn 5, wagging the tail of the car there and locking the outside front into the chicane, so slipping all over the place. But that's going to be more down to the surface, the way that the tarmac is reacting to being wet, rather than any standing water where you would actually be worried about aquaplaning. Would it be a question of actually switching to the wet? But both McLaren drivers pretty happy with getting sideways in this car. It's pretty impressive to watch.
Nico Hülkenberg for a moment went quickest to the top of the times, but right behind him on the road, Fernando Alonso, the Aston Martin, goes quicker with a 1 minute 43.277. That is about half a second quicker than Hülkenberg. Russell's just put his first proper lap of the session in to go third in the Mercedes with a 1:44.9.
Just seeing a replay of Albon going wide at turn 4 and committing to opening up the steering, going straight over the concrete very wide rather than trying to hold it, getting onto that painted exit curve and risking the rear of the car slipping out.
Right, Norris about to complete his first proper lap of the session. It puts him 4th. So Alonso quickest with a 1:43.2. Bottas 1:44.562 second. Hülkenberg 1:44.7. Was third, he's now 4th because Charles Leclerc has gone to the top of the times in the Ferrari. 1 minute 42.9. 3/10 quicker than Alonso. Magnussen goes into 3rd place with a 1:44.5.
It's a great equaliser, the wet, especially I think in conditions like this where it's new for everybody. So people really still doing their exploratory laps and just getting a feel for things. And as we were talking about earlier in this session, it would be great if it's wet again later in the weekend, because they'll have an idea for things like braking points, when to turn the car in, which curbs are okay to use and not. That's what Lando we've seen doing a lot of. And even the exit curves, you've got so much power in these cars, and trying to get that down through intermediates on a painted curb is pretty treacherous stuff. So just exploring all of that and seeing which ones react a little bit better than the others is pretty important for these guys.
Yeah, Leclerc swings the back end of the Ferrari out as well. Fernando Alonso goes back to the top of the times with a 1 minute 40.687 seconds. He's always committed, the two-time champion, isn't he? But his teammate, Lance Stroll, has just gone second, which is quite impressive. Aston 1-2 at the moment, 0.2 of a second between them. Leclerc's previous lap put him third. It's now fourth because Russell goes quicker than him. We're watching Charles Leclerc, though, on the attack after a pretty disappointing Silverstone for Ferrari, in which they, in the end, only wound up 9th and 10th in the race, having started the race pretty well. They weren't that far off the pace of the McLarens at Silverstone, but Fred Vasseur said, Silverstone wasn't good for us, but we have seen progress in the previous races. At Canada there was progress, and quote, I'm expecting us to be near the front here. So we'll see. They have won Grand Prix here, 7 Grand Prix they've won, but Leclerc goes third with that. There is a yellow flag though, track hazard. Somebody probably has had a moment.
It's gone green again though, so probably just a skip across some runoff. But yeah, I'd agree with Vasseur's sort of analysis there. Is probably a little bit of an underwhelming Silverstone for them. They're looking to get back on track. Just looking at Alonso now, who's going slowly, so possibly it was him that had a little bit of an off. Drivers here in these conditions will tend to prefer doing consecutive laps as opposed to what we call a push-cool-push sequence in dry conditions, where you'll push for one lap, let the tyres and car cool off, recharge the battery, and then push again on the next lap. In the wet, however, doing those consecutive laps, just keeping going at a lower deployment rate, is more beneficial. You can learn more, try more lines, just get more experience of the track, because that's really the crucial thing in the wet.
You mentioned the lines, Jack. Often they are different to the dry weather racing lines, aren't they? Because you get, especially over the build-up of a weekend, a train of rubber on the circuit on the racing line that can become slippy, and sometimes, and it depends where the surface water goes as well, sometimes the opposite of what you think, the far outside of a corner is the best way to go. There's more grip there. Yeah, it's known affectionately among drivers as the wall of death. Riding that white line around the outside of the corner as close as you dare, because, yeah, as you say, counterintuitively, often the dirtiest part of the track in the dry becomes the grippiest in the wet, because all of the oils that are in the rubber that gets laid down on the racing line are pretty much the exact opposite to what you want, obviously, for grip in those wet conditions. We're just seeing a replay of Sargent, who has a bit of a wiggle at the top of turn 4, goes across the runoff and manages to get going okay. But now seeing an AlphaTauri going slowly with half the front wing missing. Yeah, Yuki Tsunoda, so he's obviously at a moment as well, and gets back going again, but I think he's trundling towards the pit lane with damage to the car.
Is that pressure or precipitation induced, I wonder?
Ooh, good. Bit of both. Bit of both, I would say.
Interesting, though. Perez in the wall, Tsunoda losing half a front wing, just when Daniel Ricciardo...
At this rate, there'll be none of them left to take the seat. I mean, honestly, it's like none of them want it. No, well, hopefully we'll get a replay soon, but it looks like he's just had a little half a pirouette somewhere and nosed into a wall, but he's still going, so he'll get back to the pits, and only 2.5 minutes left. He won't be out again, I don't think.
No, Ricciardo hasn't set a time either. As Sainz, we know, at his moment, he's not set a time. Perez, we know, didn't barely get into the session. That was when it was dry. He had his off right at the start of the session. Ocon, Gasly haven't set a time. Verstappen hasn't set a time yet, nor has Lewis Hamilton.
Just seeing that Ricciardo's car sat in the garage. He's one of the cars, as you say, that's chosen to not set a time. And I wonder if that's a decision on Ricciardo's part or if that was a team decision. You'd think it would be more on Daniel's side, seeing as Yuki was out there doing laps. They're obviously happy with the conditions and the risk, maybe less so given now that Yuki's put it in the wall somewhere. But maybe Daniel feeling it wasn't worth the risk in these conditions, and that, yeah, he's expecting a dry weekend.
And as his teammate comes back into the pit lane, that risk reward has actually paid off for Daniel, and maybe just wanting to go through system checks and getting back into the swing of it, being an F1 driver in an FP1 session.
Yeah, you do have the luxury as an F1 driver of having relatively a lot of practice time before you get into that first qualifying session, so giving up half a session here in wet conditions is not going to be a big deal, especially for someone like Daniel, who's so experienced.
Just a word on my Passat. Amit's been in touch, sending a picture of a Passat that's been lowered to the ground. The splitter at the front looks aggressive. That's exactly the style that my dad had. Not quite.
Is that a 5-spoke rim I see as well? Very nice, very nice.
Low profile tyres. He's always been a fan of those as well. So, yeah, thank you, Amit, for getting in touch with that.
Dream car, Jack.
Absolutely. Actually, no, I can't say my dream car is a Cadillac, of course, but close second is a lowered, blacked out VW Passat.
That's Jack Aitken, who races in the IMSA Sports Car Championship in what is it now? What's the car?
It is
Cadillac.
Don't make me say the full name. It's a Cadillac V-Series.R LMDH prototype. It's a very nice car.
Race winning car as well at Sebring.
It is, yeah.
Pay me to say that. 33 seconds left on the clock. Oscar Piastri to the top of the times with his last lap. First driver to break the 1:40 barrier. 1:39.906. George Russell was second, is third because Lance Stroll has just put a time in of 1:40.013. Russell is just behind him on track though and snatches it back. So it's Russell, 1:39.652. Quickest. Piastri 2.5 tenths behind him. Stroll 3.5 tenths behind in third. Alonso, although he's a second off the overall pace, is still there in fourth place. Norris in fifth and Leclerc in sixth place. And we're looking at Valtteri Bottas completing a lap. The checkered flag now out. It's still pretty dark and gloomy on the run towards turn one, looking at the skies, but looking at the grandstands to the side of the straight, it's a bit brighter and a bit bluer. So who knows what sort of weather we're going to get for the second practice session.
Just trying to dissect rough pace out of this is very difficult as half the grid isn't really running, but of those that have been running, yeah, the McLarens and the Astons do look pretty good. Alonso a second off, but he hasn't been running lately and the track is improving and people gaining experience. It's natural that they go faster, so they're looking good. Russell, who is a big fan of this place and has always gone well here, but Piastri has just surpassed him to go P1. Not
bad for a rookie as Russell kicks the back end of the Mercedes out. So still the flag is out, but he's still on a lap here, looking to get himself to the top of the times. He got his one and only pole position in Formula One here last year, and he is trying to get back to the top of the times ahead of Piastri, the McLaren, having set his last lap to go slightly quicker than Russell. Stroll is still third. Norris is fourth. He improved as well. Alonso's in the pits now, but in fifth place. Bottas, we saw cross the line with a pretty good lap in the Alpha to go into sixth place here. So he's pretty much going to be the last driver home, although you've also still got Piastri out there. He's taken the flag though, and so Russell looks like the only one that might upset him. He crosses the line and does indeed go to the top of the time. So Mercedes first, McLaren second, Aston Martin third. Bit mixed up there in those conditions, as you would expect, really.
Yeah, nice to see that the McLarens are still holding on to some pace. It would seem, as we say, very early days, and you can only take these results with a pinch of salt. But by contrast, the Haas's of Hülkenberg and Magnussen languishing down towards the bottom pretty much of anyone who's done any extended running, and Sargent as well, perhaps not looking too strong down in P9, although they haven't done a lot of laps in the Williams either.
Jack, would you have wanted to have set a time? You were saying, maybe it was Daniel's choice, maybe not. Would you have wanted to get a time on the board just to get your confidence up?
It's a tough one. I mean, I probably would have liked to do some laps, even if they were more exploratory than really flat out. Just because, why not? You don't have to take a lot of risk, but I can also understand you're not going to gain a huge amount by doing that in these kind of conditions.
So with all the times having been complete in the last 10 minutes of the session, really, it's George Russell that tops the time. Second place to Oscar Piastri. Third, Lance Stroll. Fourth, Lando Norris, and fifth, Fernando Alonso. Valtteri Bottas, the best of the Alphas, in sixth place. Charles Leclerc, the best of the Ferraris, in seventh, because he was the only one that set a time. Zhou Guanyu in eighth place. Logan Sargent had a spin, but then got quicker when he went back out. So ninth in the Williams. And then the two Haases of Hülkenberg in 10th, Magnussen in 11th. Tsunoda was the only AlphaTauri to set a time. He was there. No, he wasn't actually, didn't set a time. So only 11 cars setting a time. Others went out on the track, but never actually completed a lap. So only 11 times. Russell and Piastri, though, impressive at the end of the session.
Well, there we have it. A bit of a mixed up order, some challenging conditions. And what are we reckoning? That will dry up by the time we regroup for FP2, Jack?
Could well do. As we said, it dries very quickly around here, and the hot conditions, it absolutely could. Having said that, we know how changeable the weather is at the moment in Europe, so could have another shower yet.
Well, we've had a bit of rain for the drivers to contend with already in FP1. Difficult conditions, a few bumps and scrapes. Sergio Perez hitting the wall early on in the session. He's going to need to get his confidence back ready for FP2. And Yuki Tsunoda also losing a front wing. And other drivers skating around the place as the rain fell around the Hungaroring. My thanks to Andrew Benson, Chris Hartley and Jack Aitken for talking us through the first practice session of the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend. We'll be back at 5 to 4 to talk you through the second practice session. Will it be wet? Will it be dry? There'll be plenty of action either way. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.